Many see progress and environmental protection as competing priorities, where one must always be chosen over the other. At ELOS, we see things differently. We see a partnership, a balance between improving the quality of our lives and preserving the places we call home. Our services make it possible for projects to move forward while also ensuring that they comply with all laws and regulations, that sensitive wetlands are not damaged or destroyed, that endangered species and habitats are protected, and that invaluable cultural resources are preserved for future generations. This is where we live, where we play, where we raise our families. We strive for a brighter future, but remain committed to the lands we love. ELOS, where natural environments and human interests intersect.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. As Bud said, we appreciate everyone taking the time to join and tune in and listen in to our presentation today. We'll try to keep it brief and enjoyable for your little lunchtime break today. So in terms of introductions, just in case anyone's not familiar with ELOS who's joining us or watching this on our YouTube channel, ELOS is a Louisiana-based company located in Hammond, Louisiana. It was founded in 2006, so we've been here just about 20 years now. And it started out as a small business of 10 to 20 individuals, primarily focusing on doing wetland delineations and permitting with the Army Corps of Engineers. But over time, grew its services based on clients' needs, and one thing being located in Southeast Louisiana in a very disaster-prone area of the U.S. We've fallen into a lot of industrial hygiene work by need of trying to recover from those disasters like Hurricane Katrina, Ida, Delta, Laura, just to name a few of those. So, and as we've grown, we've actually have merged with a larger group of companies called the Aventia brand. You can see a few of our sister companies named there. These companies are all very similar in background to ELOS, started as smaller companies providing environmental services and have grown over time. And being part of this network allows ELOS to serve a much broader client base across the United States, and same for our sister companies there. So that's just a little bit about ELOS and our Aventia partners. A little bit about myself. So again, my name's Drake Arnone. I've been with ELOS for a little over 8 years now. I graduated from Southeastern Louisiana University here in Hammond, and ELOS was a great fit with my environmental science degree. So I started here as a wetland scientist doing wetland delineations and cultural resource and archaeological digs. And from there, we started doing lead paint and asbestos inspections. And in terms of ELOS, I was one of the ones on the front edge of doing that and creating and growing that service line for ELOS. From there, I went on to be the president of business development for about 3 or 4 years. Again, just trying to grow more service lines, grow the company, and grow a broader client base for ELOS. And now I serve as a senior project manager, managing not only industrial hygiene efforts, but also permit, wetland delineation efforts, construction management, a whole host and variety of different types of things within the company. So today, as Bud mentioned, we're going to talk about industrial hygiene and what exactly is that? What does it mean for you or, for the company you work for? What is this all about? So let's start with the definition of industrial hygiene or an industrial hygienist. Industrial hygienists are scientists or engineers that work to protect the health and safety of people in the workplace and in the community in general. The industrial hygienist is part of a broader family of professionals that are often referred to collectively within their practice as occupational and environmental health and safety professionals. So the objectives of providing industrial hygiene services are to help either, government entities or agencies or private interest groups, companies, to maintain regulatory compliance, which we'll talk a little bit more about in coming slides, to protect public health by remaining within those compliance limits, and just managing overall environmental risks, even to the natural environment. So, and that's particularly the case, in the aftermath of natural disasters or man-made disasters like oil spills or releases or things of that nature. So these services also, support a wide range of other project needs, just in terms of compliance-driven hazard assessments of project sites, project functionings or operations, or things of that nature. So, some of the common types of industrial hygiene services are listed here. So, you may have moisture problems in a building leading to mold, and you may have an inspection done to figure out where that's at. If you have an older facility, you may have materials there that are asbestos containing, or you may have lead-based paint that was applied to the building at some point. Chemical hazards, that could be in any location. It could be as simple as cleaning janitorial supplies. Noise monitoring, this has a lot to do if you're operating heavy machinery, things of that nature. Emergency response, this goes hand in hand a lot of times with industry, which we have a lot of here in Louisiana. If something happens there, maybe a pipe is leaking or something, you have to respond quickly and get any hazardous conditions under control. And finally, risk assessments, trying to identify upfront and before any potential hazards. So maybe we have a pipe that's failing, or maybe we know that there's some asbestos here that is in poor condition. So just identifying risks and trying to address them up front. So those are just kind of some basic things that industrial hygienists may be involved with. So in industrial hygiene, in government buildings, schools, housing developments, other public infrastructure, and even private infrastructure, you must maintain high health standards. And there are various regulations to be met for these government and public facilities. And we'll discuss some of the agencies in coming slides that actually are in charge of producing those standards and also enforcing and regulating those standards. So, when you go about ensuring your compliance, you're helping to avoid problems in the future for your facilities with either employees or other users of the facility that may come in and out. And you can avoid shutdowns or having legal issues and headaches to deal with based on things that could have been prevented. So what I always like to say is, with industrial hygiene, being proactive helps to prevent occurrences in the first place. So if you could do that, everybody's in a much better place to begin with. So in terms of regulatory compliance, I mentioned that we would briefly touch on some of the main agencies that are in charge of this. So here we have a couple of federal agencies. We have the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, which was created in April of 1971. And it was created in response to growing concerns over worker exposures to hazardous work site conditions. One big thing at the time was asbestos, and there were other chemicals that were of concern to the general public about worker health and safety. So OSHA is primarily in charge of, again, producing worker safety standards as well as enforcing the regulation of those standards. And listed there as one of the main standards that they have, although they have multiple federal regulation standards that they enforce. So also listed here, we have the Environmental Protection Agency. They were created in December of 1970, again, in response to growing concerns over various industrial disasters that had happened during that time. And there's other general pollution concerns that were happening at that time. So the EPA was created and put in charge of protecting natural resources such as air, water, soil, or what I like to call the bugs and bunnies aspect of environmental resources. Another agency that has become highly involved with regulating, health standards within buildings is HUD, which is the Department of Housing and Urban Development. One of the primary things that HUD looks at is lead hazard safety in homes. Any homes that were built prior to 1978 have the potential for this. Now, HUD was created in September of 1965 to address growing concerns with housing availability and affordability. And as part of that mission, around 1978, they started to notice that lead was poisoning, especially children, in some of these public housing facilities. And at which point, lead paint in residential use began to be regulated. So HUD is actually one of the more proactive agencies. They actually have grant programs to help eliminate lead hazards in older homes. So, we work actually with a lot of different local and state agencies who get that grant funding and then help go eliminate the lead paint in the home. So, and then finally, there are, that's just a few of the federal regulatory agencies. You also have, the Department of Health and Human Services, other agencies that may have input on these things. And then, of course, at the state and local level, you have agencies who serve a similar function. So, for instance, here in Louisiana, you have DEQ, which would serve a similar function as EPA at the federal level. Again, you've also got a Department of Health. Here, you've got a Department of Coastal Management. Here, there's also local health and housing departments. So there's a variety of agencies who are set in charge of enforcing and regulating safety and compliance for buildings and facilities. So now let's talk about some common hazards that are encountered in a workplace, in a building, at a job site, things of that nature that may be addressed by an industrial hygienist. So we've got a few different categories here. We've got chemical, physical, biological, and ergonomic. And that's just a few. There are other types of things. But within the chemical domain, you'd be talking about things like lead paint, asbestos fibers, cleaning solvents. You may be even talking about things like pesticides, herbicides, things of that nature. You could even be talking about air fresheners, things like that, that in too great of a concentration are not good. And so, if you have problems with those things, you're going to have non-compliance issues with the regulatory agencies, and it can cause problems with shutdowns with your facilities, potentially. In the physical domain, you have things such as noise, heat, vibrations, other things like that. So obviously this affects a lot of your blue collar labor type jobs, especially things like heat here in Louisiana is a major issue during the summertime to be aware of for those types of jobs. But also you have things like noise. If you're operating heavy machinery, you want to protect the hearing of not only the workers, but the public around. So there are regulations to keep within certain parameters for that. In terms of biological, you can have mold, you can have bacteria or viruses. So, mold can be found in older facilities, older homes, even newer facilities where maybe windows weren't installed properly, you have some leaks, things of that nature. Of course, bacteria can be found in places like kitchens, restrooms, other places where you have organic material being processed there. So those things are important to look for in a building and can often be hidden. And so it takes a thorough investigation to track those down. And the final type we'll look at here is ergonomics. So this has to do with designing the workspace and the operations such that it's easy on the bodies of the employees. So for instance, if there's heavy lifting to be done, ensuring that's done in such a way that it's not going to injure the back of the person doing the lifting, things of that nature. So, and then of course, a lot of repetitive motions can cause injuries as well. So taking breaks, things of that nature to make sure that the workers are protected from those types of injuries. Now, there are a few core principles within industrial hygiene to try to limit exposures for workers, occupants, and other people. The first is to anticipate potential hazards. So you want to be aware and always be focused on the fact that hazards exist, and it's the industrial hygienist's job to identify those and help to minimize them. So you do that by recognizing what existing hazards may be there at the facility. So you may perform an inspection to go and look for and identify, oh, we have lead paint here, we have asbestos here, we store chemicals in this closet, things of that nature. And then you want to evaluate, well, what are the exposure risks based on what we have here? Our asbestos containing material is in good condition. There's not a hazard from that. Our chemicals closet stays unlocked where anybody can get to it. There is a hazard. We should address that by locking it. So evaluating what you have there and implementing control measures. Again, like I said, locking the chemical closet. Or if there's lead paint in your facility, let's stabilize the paint surface so that lead is not coming from that paint. And finally, you want to communicate clearly to the people using the facility. So communicating and having everyone be aware and understand the potential hazards helps them to also avoid those hazards. Now, within that, we spoke about different controls. There are different types of control methods that industrial hygienists will employ to, again, further reduce exposure as much as possible. The most effective and the one at the top of the list there is elimination. So, maybe we don't need to use these specific chemicals to clean. There's an alternative that is less or not hazardous at all. We'll eliminate the use of the bleach that we're using, we'll say, or we'll substitute that chemical for a different type of chemical that is less hazardous. So those are the most effective ways of doing things. Maybe we have asbestos containing floor tiles, so we want to eliminate them by abating and removing them, and then we want to substitute that floor tile for something that doesn't have asbestos in it. Engineering controls would be something along the lines of, say, we are abating asbestos work, removing some floor tiles out. We will have air filtration systems, different engineering techniques to pull the asbestos from the air should it be not loose from its substrate. So you have, or again, that could be putting a lock on the chemical closet within the facility. So that's a type of engineering control. Administrative controls have to do with how people are doing the job. So the example I'll use for this one is heat stress. So in the summer, you may use a system of having people take short breaks every so often in order to make sure that they're not getting overheated. That's an administrative control. You change how they do the job in order to prevent heat stress. And then finally, of course, the last option, but a fairly effective option, is using personal protective equipment. So, in the case of heat, maybe we have fans. Maybe we provide tents for shade. In terms of asbestos, we'll have half-face respirators. We'll wear Tyvek suits. We'll don the appropriate type of personal protective equipment to make sure that we've completely eliminated our exposure to whatever the hazard may be there. So now, and one of the last things we'll talk about here are some of the more common types of things that a worker or a building occupant may be exposed to. Mold is probably the most common thing that people may be exposed to, and that's because, in truth, mold is ubiquitous. It's found everywhere. There's nowhere that you can go where mold is not there. And that's especially true in damp climates like here in Louisiana. Especially older homes that have building envelope issues, things like that, are going to experience problems with mold much more frequently. And just by keeping an eye on those things, you can do preventative cleaning and measurements to keep it from getting worse. But some of the things that happen is, people will experience symptoms similar to allergies or having the cold or flu if they're exposed to high concentrations of mold. And this can be different in different people. Some people may not be affected at all by high concentrations of mold, whereas some people may be greatly affected by even a small concentration of mold. And with mold, while there are guidelines, there are not hard and fast regulations the way that there is for other types of materials, because mold is much more fluid. It's a living and growing organism. So it's hard to set a definitive guideline or level for mold. Lead, like I mentioned earlier, is primarily found in homes built before 1978, but lead paint is used in other industrial settings even still. So for instance, some bridges may have lead paint that's used on them because it's very durable over time and protects the metal in the bridge from rusting. But if a worker or specifically a child is exposed to lead, it can have neurological delays. There can be other parts of the body that are affected, including the reproductive organs if there's enough of the lead concentration present. The Department of Human Health actually runs the childhood blood lead level program for Louisiana. So if any child is tested and comes up with an elevated level of lead in their blood, it immediately triggers action to try to eliminate whatever the hazard is that's causing that for that child. And finally, asbestos is still a common material that is still used, though it's been banned in residential use. Again, it's still used in some industrial settings. It's very good at insulating from heat or cold, so it's used as insulation. It's extremely durable and it's waterproof, so used as flooring. It has good acoustical properties, so it dampens sound, so you'll often see it in ceiling tiles as well, things like that. Different types of glue and mastic, fireproof doors, things that have to be fireproof. So it can be found in a lot of places. And the hazard from asbestos is when it's in the air. If it's locked within a substrate, there's no hazard there. But when it's in the air and it's breathed in or ingested, and it can get into the stomach or the esophagus, it can cause things like lung cancer, mesothelioma, which is a cancer of the meso or the mucus lining in the lungs or in the stomach, and then asbestosis, which is a scarring of the lower lung tissue caused by the sharp fibrous asbestos fibers. And these symptoms, these diseases can take 20 to 40 years to appear. So someone that's exposed may not necessarily know it right away. So it's important to keep staff safe from those types of materials. Again, there are many other types of things, but these are some of the most common things that a worker or an occupant of a facility may come across. So the key takeaways that we're trying to illustrate in this presentation are that compliance is not optional. There are regulatory agencies that have been set in charge of making sure that workers and occupants are safe within facilities. And that's not only for government public facilities, but it really is for private facilities as well to maintain those standards. Like I said earlier, I'm always a big proponent of being proactive about things. Preventing things up front is a lot more time and cost effective than having to deal with an issue that you're being reactive and has sprung up and surprised you. And in reality, protecting your workforce is a moral responsibility, but it's also for the good of the company or the organization. A healthy workforce obviously can do a much better job. So using industrial hygienists, implementing these services as a check and a backstop for your operations, your facilities. It's really a strategic long-term investment to make sure that you don't run into any larger issues later on down the line. And again, this goes for even non-disaster settings. Collecting data and maintaining your facilities, keeping an eye on your operations for safety can go a long way in really preventing disasters from happening. And with that, that's the end of our presentation, and I'll throw it back to Bud to moderate any questions we may have.
Thank you, Drake. So if you have a question, feel free, type it directly into the chat box, and we can go ahead and get that answered for you. While we're waiting to see if we have any questions, I do want to remind you that this presentation will be available on our YouTube channel, likely in the next couple of days. You will receive an email when it is available. Please feel free to share it with anybody you think would benefit from the information. or if you'd just like to rewatch it yourself. In the chat box is also Drake's email address. Should you think of a question or something come up at a later time and you wanted to reach out for more information on something that was in the presentation, or perhaps something that wasn't in the presentation that you think he might be able to assist you with. I'm not seeing anyone typing any questions into the chat box. Well, I am now. Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for that. So since we don't have any questions, apparently, Drake, this happens a lot with Drake because he's so good at presenting that he leaves you without any questions. Thank you again for attending. Be on the lookout for future topics on our LinkedIn page. You can give us a follow and you'll be notified when we have future webinars. Also, please feel free to shoot us a message if you have a topic you'd like to see covered, or something you'd be interested in learning more about that we may be able to put a presentation together for. We're happy to hear your ideas. The whole point of this is to help you avoid problems in your projects and facilities and anything environmental related that you're dealing with. So with that, not seeing any questions, again, thank you for joining us today, and we wish you a great rest of your day. Thank you.